there's no double standard there.
No double standard?
No double standard. Israel hasn't signed the NPT and hasn't violated it. Iran is in violation of a solemn treaty commitment, and it has, over a period of 17 years, refused to come clean over its activities, and refused to answer the questions of the IAEA, and it's in violation of several UN Security Council resolutions. So I don't see that as a double standard. It is a matter of, I think, global concern that one more country not get away after North Korea and Iraq, that we not have a third country that gets away with using its NPT status as to cover for a covert weapons program.
But at the same time, you agree to provide India with nuclear technology, although India is not a party to the NPT.
Yes.
That has generated a lot of concerns amongst its rivals in Pakistan. And what do you think of, say, this ambiguity over the nuclear proliferation here?
If I had been president, that would not have been an agreement I would have signed. I do share the Bush administration's motivation for undertaking it, which was that this strained relationship with India had lasted too long, that then we needed to find a way out of the difficulties that had been started by India's test in 1974.
And later on in 1998.
Yes, but began in 74.
Yes.
So it had been lasting a long time. I think that we just didn't get enough, in my view, in the negotiation, and so we traded off progress with India for, I think, some harm to the global regime.
You are one of the policymakers who suggested that the American foreign policy should not be based on, say, war on terror any longer, because this phrase is not so popular. Instead, you should, and also you called for the Bush administration not to, base your policy on a coalition of democracies, because the cultural diversity and different levels of economic development in East Asia are very complicated. So what's the centerpiece of your suggestions for the American policy towards East Asia, which is known increasingly for its economic dynamism?
Well, we've been mouthing this phrase now for 25 years, that the future belongs to Asia, 21st century will be Asia. But we haven't adjusted our institutional realities and our political focus to that. We tend to have people who have been schooled in European and Soviet affairs run our foreign policy establishment. And from time to time you'll see Southeast Asia or East Asia generally ignored or overlooked because of higher priorities assigned elsewhere. And it's my belief that we need to have personnel in a new administration who have an eye on Asia, who see where our interests lie in Asia, and will maximize our interests in the region by engaging effectively.
What do you think of the relationship between Moscow and Washington over the past 8 years?
It has gone steadily downhill since 9/11, when President Putin was the first foreign leader to call President Bush with condolences, and there was talk about even not just a partnership, but even a strategic partnership. Since then, the relationship has just steadily declined and taken a very deep dive in the last 2 years.
Why?
A variety of reasons. I think a lot of the blame rests with the United States, which has tended to kind of go its own way, ignoring what Russian feelings were on some critical issues. NATO expansion is a critical one.
Is it a mistake that Russia has not been properly rewarded for its very cooperative attitudes towards either the eastward expansion of NATO, or, for example, the Iranian uranium enrichment program, to which Russia is one of the parties in the negotiation?
No, I don't think it's a question of being rewarded. What I think the mistake that I would hope the United States tries to correct now was in ignoring what are legitimate Russian interests on its own borders. And that, of course, NATO expansion is a critical issue there. The question of how we treated Kosovo is a critical issue there. Whether or not we extend the first step in NATO expansion towards Ukraine and Russia, what's called MAP. The unilateral renunciation of the ABM treaty early in the Bush administration. All of these things Russia basically had to swallow. And the resentment of that has boiled up, steadily grown and boiled over. And the missile defense deployment in Poland and Czech Republic. By the same token, Russia's policies are partly to blame. The dramatic loss of democracy within Russia was certainly of concern to the United States. And then in the last 2 years, a number of policy moves, especially and most importantly in Georgia and in President Medvedev's recent speech, all suggest a much more antagonistic or aggressive Russian posture towards the U.S. The important thing right now is that the two countries sit down and begin to sort out all of these issues, because the number of issues where it's important for Russia and the U.S. to have a good relationship is really enormous.
Let's look at the president himself as a person, as a real person. When he said to the press, I can trust Vladimir Putin, look him in the eye and you think he's someone you can trust. And years have passed, the bilateral relationship declined sharply between the two sides. What do you think of this part of his character as the cowboy from Texas, who is said to examine things in black and white terms? Therefore, under the influence of the neocons, he has generated a lot of troubles.
His personality is one where he likes to make an early judgment about the leaders he's dealing with. Mm-hmm. The first couple of minutes of their encounters can make a big difference in whether he feels this is somebody he can work with or someone he cannot work with. The cowboy image, I don't think, is the appropriate one, although being from Texas, he uses his boots and his hats to send a message. The Bush administration will be remembered for a lot of things. His personality was a big part of it. I don't think the neocons controlled him. You cannot look at our policy in Africa, which under Bush has been rather successful, and our policy in East Asia generally, which has been fairly successful, and say that he was dominated by the neocons in either area.
And certainly our China policy.
That's what I'm talking about.
But when you said he didn't support the neocons, what do you think of the results of the dogfight between Colin Powell and Rumsfeld over Iraq? Obviously, there was some kind of unpleasant chemistry between the two major policymakers. And then what happened was the departure of Colin Powell from the State Department out of dismay.
Yeah, well, I think Doug's point was it wasn't uniform across the whole 8 years. There were important issues, the U.S.-China relationship being one, where the president took a very different view from the neocon view. But on Iraq, unfortunately, I think he took the neocon advice and followed that route and put Secretary Rumsfeld in charge of that whole war very uniquely, and it was a terrible mistake.
How shall we treat President Bush? Do you think he has been treated fairly by the media and by the electorate over Iran?
Yes, I do.
Jessica has been very critical of your president, Mr. Bush, George W. Bush. But do you think the current president will go down in your history as the worst president?
Well, he may be blamed as the worst president in the last 100 years, and there'd be plenty of indicators. His level of popularity, leaving 2 wars unfinished at the end of his term of office, and a financial crisis. These things will all be stacked up against him. Whether he's the worst president in history, well, we had some interesting presidents in the 19th century, and I don't know enough about the 1880s and 1890s to compare them that closely. But in terms of modern times, I think the scorecard is going to be against him.